So, the translations are out for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 407, and let's just say that this chapter is something unexpected because we get a focus on a character's backstory that I'm going to be honest, I didn't think that we were going to get, and it is probably the darkest thing that we've seen in My Hero Academia so far. And you'll get to see why that is right now. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Andrew, and I'm here to do my manga review for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 407, titled Paranormal Orphan. And just from the title alone, you can probably get a feel for what this chapter is going to be about. As I said earlier, this chapter is going to be a flashback, but it's going to be a flashback very much specifically from the perspective of All For One, as well as Yoichi, his younger brother. And we're getting their origins more or less in this chapter. A little bit more on the side of All For One, but we get a lot of information when it comes to these two brothers and what was going on actually during the time where quirks were coming into existence. So let's just dive right into this review and really talk about what's going on. And to start, for the most part, the chapter is being narrated by a narrator, obviously, really telling us the story of what's been going on in the life of All For One, starting from his birth all the way up until the moment where we see that he most likely killed his younger brother Yoichi. And some of the information that we learn from this moment is that apparently their mother was a prostitute, and apparently that she had a growth growing on her arm and that she didn't know she was pregnant until she gave birth at a river and died. And later on, we learned that the growths that were going on her arm were actually parts of a quirk that she had, and that All For One, even as a baby, the moment that he was born, actually took the quirk of his mother. And this is very interesting because a lot of what we're getting in this chapter is actually really showing a different perspective of what happened before the glowing baby incident. And pretty much what this chapter confirms is that the glowing baby, while was the first documented quirk user, is not actually the first. And it's even established that 50 people were shown to have quirks even before the quirk of the glowing baby was even known about. And even to add on to that, we even get information from the narrator that when this quirk or this phenomenon was being known and being studied, that this seems to be an addition to the genome or the gene of the humans that have the quirk, and that it was believed to be of a non-human origin, and that while this is popping up around the world, that early decision really caused the entire floodgates to be open and really allowed for chaos to reign. Which is unfortunate because this seems to be just an issue when it comes to science, where we're making predetermined understandings. Actually, when I say this is something that science should never do. Shouldn't make predetermined explanations for what something is before having all of the facts. So the fact that someone immediately said that, oh yeah, no, this thing, this genome in the humans is non-human, was something that a scientist shouldn't do, and we see that it had very great ramifications throughout the entire story, which leads to most likely individuals with quirks being persecuted and discriminated against, and even within the chapter actually actively hunted by anti-meta ability activists, or as we should probably call them, more or less terrorists. So we get a lot that was very much unpredictable when it came to how the world fell into chaos. And we also get the scene that we actually saw in the first chapter when it talks about how these quirks aren't something that just develop at these random times, that they can develop either being pre-pubescent or during puberty, as we see a more or less like modernization of the panel where we get to see multiple individuals that are using the quirks. The guy with a telepathy flipping a book, a dude with like a flaming like monster head, and the woman that has like eyes like around her arms. She seems to be a little bit more mature in this rendition of that panel than it was in the original one. But either way, there's a fair amount that we're getting about the history of the world, and just to add on to that, we even get an explanation about how All For One, even as a baby, was arrogant, because as we see that apparently rats, which is a very cool callback to the idea that maybe the disease of quirks was spread by rats, tried to attack All For One and Yoichi as babies, as well as their dead mother, but luckily enough, the river was able to wash them away, where we get a little bit more context to this later on in the chapter about how All For One believes that he has the right to anything and everything that he desires, and that if you are unable to provide him with any type of benefit that he can use, then you are disposable. And we see that he has this fervor inside of him even as a young child, as we see that he's clenching on to the body of his dead mother, even with what we're assuming is his teeth or his gums just biting into her body, trying to survive, because that's just who All For One is. So this is very interesting because it gives a little bit more depth and idea of the All For One that we know now has more or less been the All For One that he was as a baby, arrogant, in a way you could probably say narcissistic, but also just craving everything and having everything belonging to him. And we get that exemplified where we get to see that the anti-meta people who are against quirks sees a child and is like, he's a paranormal orphan, yeah, we'll catch his disease. And then he just kills them because he does not find any worth in them. And the only exception to this rule is his younger brother Yoichi, who tries to stop him from doing these bad things, where All For One just kicks him away, but he still keeps him around, not that he has any benefit to him, but that he still perceives Yoichi as his. As well as we finally get the scene where we get to see more of the modern All For One being born, because the implication in this chapter is that when he was young, he's just doing these things without really a purpose, without really a motive, more or less trying to survive. As well as we got a little bit more confirmation that the first quirk that he ever stolen was his mother's quirk, which is actually interesting because it seems to be the spike quirk that we've seen him use multiple times throughout the series. But we pretty much see the origins of All For One wanting to be the Demon Lord, where Yoichi says that, oh yeah, I'm just reading this book, but I can't really read that well, but it's so great that this individual is able to tell a story just with images themselves. As All For One begins to sit by him and start reading it alongside his brother, as Yoichi declares that he wants to be like Captain Hero. He wants to be a hero as well. And even this moment ties into the idea of who Yoichi is as a character, because even though his older brother has done these horrible things with him, he's still willing to stay by his side and even share his book and like look at it alongside him, because he still has faith in his brother that there is some kindness inside of him, because he has the faint memory of when All For One was holding on to his dead mother, he was also holding on to Yoichi, and believes if he cares at the very least a little bit, he probably would have held my hand. That is Yoichi's perspective. That type of perspective really shows how altruistic Yoichi can actually be, which is very much understandable why he is supporting Deku within the modern times. And getting a little bit more into the final part of the chapter, we apparently do a 3-year time skip in this flashback. We have Yoichi, the younger brother, just looking up at All For One, and he just comes to this realization of, what are you doing? As we get confirmation that All For One did steal the quirk of the glowing baby, which is very much hinted at a little bit early on, a few chapters ago, of his body glowing. But also, All For One just gives an explanation for like why he did it, as he explains that the idea that I said earlier, that, oh yeah, the glowing baby wasn't the one that was the first to actually get a quirk. Like 50 people were documented to have quirks in India earlier than that. And apparently the glowing baby during this entire time became more of an activist or a symbol for people who had these meta abilities, and how he had like 1 million followers, and that for the most part, All For One was just jealous. And with that jealousy, he just killed the glowing baby and stole his meta ability. And as Yoichi is trying to question like why he's doing it, we see that All For One says that, oh, it's because of what the comics did. All for one, one for all. And he talks about how that's a beautiful concept, and how the villain reigns due to fear, and how All For One also wants a world where everyone exists only for his own sake, just like you, referring to Yoichi, and that this is now his dream too. really just showing that that comic really solidified what All for One was to become, and the chapter ends with him seeing his younger brother running away from him, questioning why he's running, who's that individual holding his hand, and that if he doesn't stop, then he'll just get rid of him, as we see the final panel of Yoichi's hand being cut off. And many people theorize that that could have potentially been one of the hands that Tomura has been holding the entire time, and that All for One has been holding on to it because of his attachment to his younger brother. And unfortunately, we are going to be on break for next week, but let me just say this, Horikoshi left us on a banger of a cliffhanger. And how, for the most part, this was a very unexpected chapter. I don't think anyone would have predicted that we were going to get a All for One flashback where we get a detailed understanding of what his life was prior to Yoichi's death. And that potentially we're going to get a little bit more explanation for what happened to All for One after it. And we may get after it his confrontations with the other users of One for All, and that he may be getting a better understanding of why he wants One for All so much. And I think what this flashback is pretty much solidifying is that the reasoning why he wants One for All is not necessarily because of the power, but because he's trying to reclaim what is his, what is mine, his younger brother Yoichi. Which, if that is the case, it kind of adds a little bit more understanding for why he always constantly refers to One for All as his little brother, his younger brother, or anytime he says that I want to go after One for All, it's always either preceded or followed by younger brother more often than not. So if anything, what this chapter does is give All for One a lot of character development and a fair amount of character depth. It isn't saying anything new, it isn't saying anything profound about the character of All for One, but it gives us a better understanding of why he is the way that he is, and that it may not necessarily be due to his circumstances, but just who he is at his core. And that while he does monstrous things, the fact that he still values something in his younger brother, as twisted as it may be, really shows that he's still very much human at his core, a corrupt one, but still very much human. But yeah, there's a lot more that you can really say about this chapter when it comes to All for One, but I'm going to probably halt on that a little bit more until we get the full scope of what's going on in this flashback. Some people may believe that this is very much like not really going to be from the perspective of All for One, that this is something that is fake, that this is something that didn't actually happen. But because we do not get a clear definition of who this narrator is, I believe that we can take it at face value and say this is what happened to All for One and Yoichi, because a lot of what is said in this chapter correlates with what we knew in the main story as a whole. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the chapter. And let me ask you this, what did you think of the chapter? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? And do you think that this was something that we needed for the character of All for One to be a more fleshed out and developed character? Leave your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!